So Critic's Cove. Critic's Cove is symbolized by a beholder. And in Dungeons & Dragons, a beholder is basically this floating orb of a creature with one main eyeball and a whole bunch of eye stalks, and each of the eyes fires a different dangerous beam. It has eye beams that could sap your strength, and eye beams that could break your will, and just leave you this like shallow, broken husk of a human being. And probably the one system that we have in our organizations that really, I think, fits with that perception of a beholder would be performance evaluations. I can think of very few systems in organizations that sap people's energy and will and excitement faster than performance evaluations. And performance evaluations are, I think, extremely difficult to do right. In fact, at the Go to Be Floberg Center, we've completely eliminated them because we found that they actually do far more harm than good. For example, it's hard to develop a performance evaluation that doesn't have a fairly high degree of subjectivity. Now, I've often seen, and we use in our own organization, performance evaluations with 4 or 5 point Likert scale, and how would you rate this person on teamwork or something like that, and then maybe you got a 3 or a 4, and then that means you're making this subjective judgment, which basically puts a supervisor in a place where now they are sitting in judgment of the staff member they're evaluating, which is really not very comfortable in my experience for the supervisor, and it's definitely not comfortable for the person that they are supervising and trying to evaluate. And so when you got these subjective Likert sort of scales, now you run into what's the difference between a 3 and a 4? That's a very legitimate question that a staff member can ask, and I've never been able to come up with an adequate answer when I've either been creating evaluations or delivering evaluations. So then, on the opposite end of the spectrum, okay, so let's reduce subjectivity and let's just go with clearly measurable metrics, clearly measurable goals, clearly measurable objectives. Then you run into the problem of, okay, you come up with 4 or 5 measurable metrics of performance, but does that really broadly cover who this human being is? That's kind of, then now you get into this dehumanizing aspect of performance evaluations. How do you encapsulate all of the skill, all of the talent, all of the hopes and dreams that a staff member comes to you and that ideally we would like to tap in a handful of measurable metrics? Really, the driving force behind us moving out of Critic's Cove and getting rid of performance evaluations really comes down to, in my own experience, I've never, I've had a lot of different performance evaluations. Actually, I'm the only person who currently still receives a performance evaluation in our organization from our board of directors. And our board of directors is always really good, really supportive, very professional, very kind and polite. And they may have, in my evaluation, there may be 9 very positive things about my performance. But unfortunately, going back to when I first started receiving performance evaluations, it's not those 9 positive things that I walk out ruminating upon. It's the one negative thing, the one thing that I am perceived as not doing as well as I could, or I could do better, or I didn't do so well on. No matter how constructive it's set, that's what I walk out of those evaluations thinking about and ruminating on, and that's a worry. That's a deflating sort of process, and we have so many stressors in our field. Why add one more unnecessary stressor when there are other ways to hold all of ourselves accountable, other ways to recognize the good works, other ways to correct when there's performance discrepancies, other than performance evaluations, especially if they're done like every 6 months, every year. If that's when you're giving feedback to your staff, you're doing it wrong because it's way too late by then.